Good morning, and welcome to today's webcast, ERP System Selection, Align Technology with Business Goals. Before we begin, I'm going to play a brief housekeeping video.
Welcome, and thank you for viewing our webcast series. Before we begin, please keep the following in mind. You can customize how you view our presentation and interact with the presenter. For better viewing, close all other applications and turn up your speaker volume. You can adjust window size and placement or enter full screen mode using the controls at the top right of the window or dragging the bottom right-hand corner to resize. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see a series of icons that relate to a different aspect of our session. You can download a PDF of today's slides from the Slide Deck and Handouts widget. You can ask questions by typing in the Q&A window and clicking Submit. We'll do our best to answer all questions or follow up via email. If you experience technical difficulty, refresh your browser by hitting the F5 key. This presentation is not legal, investment, or accounting advice. We encourage you to seek the counsel of a professional service provider to apply this content to your specific circumstances.
I'm pleased to introduce today's presenters from Moss Adams, Chuck Andrews, Director, and Kevin Goergen, Senior Manager. Chuck has worked in technology and information systems consulting since 1995 with a focus on delivering complex consulting projects. He has extensive experience evaluating and implementing enterprise software systems, including enterprise resource planning, customer relationship management, learning management, and field service management. Kevin is a software selection advisory consultant with 14 years of experience in enterprise resource planning systems. Throughout his extensive career, Kevin has served as a technology advisor in various capacities, including software selection, system selection, assessment, implementation, project management, as well as functional and technical consulting. With that, I'll turn it over to Kevin to get our presentation started.
Thanks, Chad. I appreciate it. Can everybody hear me okay? Excellent. Well, thank you everybody for joining today. Really appreciate it. We'll get right into what our agenda will cover. So first, we're going to talk about what prompts an investment in a system change. We'll talk about starting with your business priorities, engaging your enablers within the process, identify the priority-driven requirements, and then engaging providers on your terms. And then finalize how Moss Adams can add value to the process. And with that, we're going to get right into our very first polling question. Chad.
All right, thank you, Kevin. And our first polling question of the day, what industry are you in? Either A, manufacturing, B, telecom, C, life sciences, D, construction, E, aerospace and defense, F, hospitality, G, professional services, or H, other. And if you just select the answer on your screen and hit the submit button, your polling question will be recorded today. You might have to scroll down just a bit to see some of the lower answers. Just make your selection. All right, we'll give everyone about 5 to 8 more seconds here. All right, let's check out the results.
Well, it looks like we have quite a few in manufacturing, professional services, and a lot of you answered other, with some in construction and hospitality. So what we'll try to do with that is, if you answered other, if you could in the chat, just provide us what other industry that's not covered here are you in. That way we can help tailor some of our conversation today to your industry specific needs. Thanks so much. I'll turn it over to Chuck.
Thanks, Kevin. So the first topic we wanted to cover today is what prompts investment in system change. And while there's a lot of indicators or symptoms, I think it really comes down to two main reasons that really drive a new systems initiative. The first is end of life issues. Your current technology, you've gotten the EOL notice from your vendor, you've been given a date, and they're basically retiring their current system. They're either getting out of the business or they're going to a new gen system, and maybe you're taking this opportunity to see whether or not it's going to be that new gen system or something else. Another area that I look at here is that, again, when I talk about end of life, really what that means is support for your current system is ending for any reason. And sometimes that's because you've got a provider that's just monetizing an outdated asset and they're really not doing anything with it. And so when I say support, basically what I'm looking at there is the system is it considered a going concern? Are they updating? Are they staying up to date? When was your last update? These are kind of questions to ask, and maybe while you haven't received an end of life notice, you may have a system that's, quote unquote, dying on the vine. And so, that's one of the areas that we look at as far as one key reason being end of life. And the second one is misalignment. And this is where I get into a myriad of symptoms, but at the end of the day, your system is not aligned with the mission of the business. It's not aligned with the operations of the business. And some of your indicators of that, workarounds, lack of data entry controls. So you're spending more time downstream cleaning up transactions, or it's making it difficult to reconcile after the fact. One of my favorites is vocal frustration with the current system. And typically, this is personified in a nickname for the system that could be less than flattering. And so I don't know if anybody wants to be this bold, but if any of you have heard a nickname that your teams call the system and it's safe for work, you can throw that in the Q&A as well. But that's one of the key things that I hear about when we've got bad misalignment and we've got a lot of friction that's preventing the delivery of the business. Now, an important thing to remember regarding misalignment is to make sure the issues are real. We've seen instances where there are bad configurations, bad implementations, and the system isn't necessarily at fault. It's the way it's implemented or the way it's configured. And so make sure the issues are real and engage hard on your current provider. I tell people, tell the provider that they're putting you out of business and you're going to go somewhere else if they don't solve your problem. I think it's important that you put the provider on notice. As an example, I had a multi-trade services organization that I was working with, and they were using a multi-trade system to deal with field service and accounting. And the owner of the company brought me in and said, I need a new system. My team's very frustrated. We need to move on. And I asked the CEO, Don, the owner, I said, Don, what does your current provider say? And we were in a meeting with all of his senior managers, and not one person at that table had reached out directly and spoken to an executive at the software company or the system provider. And so they didn't really know if their issues were real. And so in that meeting, I called that vendor, got their CEO on the phone, handed the phone to the president of that company, and said, you guys need to talk. And I left. That was a sales call, and I left because I don't solve the problem where people aren't engaging with a current vendor. So be careful on misalignment and make sure it's real. And so I think those are the two reasons, the only real reason categories that I can think of. I think that reasons that fall outside this bucket, you're not investing, you're spending. And if an owner of a business wants to, pay for cool, I'm fine with that. But I do consider that spend versus investing. And so when we look at misalignment, which is really where you need to leave the system, where end of life the system's left you. What's the goal of the system selection process, and why are we talking about this? We're trying to eliminate the risk of misalignment on the next go around where you're selecting your new system, so that you understand what that fit looks like. And so let me just hand it back to Chad. Chad, I think we have our next polling question.
Thank you, Chuck. Why are you considering a system change? Either A, end of life, or B, misalignment? Maybe about 10 seconds to answer this question. And if you just select the answer on your screen and hit the submit button, your polling question will be recorded. Give you about 5 more seconds here. All right, let's check out the results.
Wow, a lot of end of life. And I think we're seeing a good share of this, Kevin, in the market. I know a lot of the older Microsoft programs, particularly tailored to the mid-market, Great Plains, Solomon. Everything seems to be converging on Navision, which is now Business Central. Have you seen any evidence of that in your space, Kevin?
Yeah, for sure. I think you named probably one of the top ones, end of life. But it also could be something like as simple as like QuickBooks. I mean, it's just kind of nearing its end of life, and maybe somebody had said basically, "Hey, this isn't serving us any longer." And so it's not necessarily misaligned; it just doesn't scale. And so
Yeah.
Microsoft GP, we have countless clients that are going to be migrating away from Microsoft GP and don't necessarily want to just go to, I'll say, Microsoft Business Central or Microsoft D365 F&O. They, they're exploring other options that are out there in the marketplace that I'll say are not just financial packages. They're more operational. They have better, say, solutions in terms of end-to-end for procure to pay, for example. So, I'm not. I mean, two-thirds are saying end of life, which is
What about the
interesting.
construction space?
Yeah. Oh, the construction space is, that tends to be an interesting one. I love working with our construction clients. Well, I think mostly though, what they're looking for is something that's not necessarily aligned with their needs, and that means bringing in operational aspects, not just basically bringing together finance and operations together to make sure that they have, I'll say, visibility and clarity over what they need.
Is there any end of life going on there?
Yeah, so like we said, Microsoft Great Plains, we've had several of our clients there on Sage as well. Some of the Sage products aren't necessarily end of life; they just aren't scaling with their business. So construction is a great example of that, where we have quite a few clients that are getting off of, I'll say, the Sage 100 products or the Sage 300 products. And migrating to something that better suits their end-to-end business. They want clarity over their financials. They want visibility all along the process. What did we bid up front? What did we plan for on our construction project or our construction job? And then what actually occurred? And they want that, I'll say, that flexibility in a system that helps them scale and grow their business across their various, say, either regions that they serve or the core market that they serve in terms of what they're trying to achieve for better
So they're
results.
kind of they're vetting additional options rather than the next generation of Sage.
Yeah, exactly. And they're bringing
Okay.
in, yeah, they're bringing in some other, I'll say, partners that better fit them from even a human resource perspective. So making sure that their time entry aligns with their work codes, making
Mhm.
sure that payroll is aligned with time and attendance. So they're seeing real value there in terms of transitioning.
Good deal. Good deal. All right.
Yeah,
Wonderful.
thanks.
Wonderful. All right. So in terms of the selection process, um, to align with the business, obviously, the first step is understanding the priorities of the business. And the best place to start there is the business plan, and looking at the priorities that are associated with that. And I think that revenue generation, it tends to be big. I think it's a universal truth. Nonprofits call it development, foundations call it endowment management, but the bottom line is everybody has to generate revenue. It's kind of the fuel for the business. Priorities that we see are decision support. Getting decision support needed when the decision support's needed. That sounds a little circular, but people like the information that they need when it's relevant and when it's timely so that they can support the decision at hand. Another area that we see is business process management, workflows, automation, and alerts to control processes, keep you in compliance. And then Kevin alluded to this earlier. It's a recurring theme that we see that at a high level, particularly, that there needs to be increased coordination between business operations, finance, and accounting. That articulation is essential. And typically, one of the quotes that people that work with me always hear me say is, "No problem started in the back office." And I think there's a lot of truth to that, in that if processes are aligned on the sales side and on the delivery side with the general ledger structure, then things just tend to work a lot more smoothly, and decision support seems to be easier to get. It's a tall ask, but I think it's something that businesses that run well, it kind of sets them apart. And I think rule of thumb on aligning with the business priorities is that if it doesn't drive revenue up or it doesn't drive spending down, why are we doing it? And that doesn't necessarily mean anything else gets thrown out, because there's some other areas of the business you might be tending to, ESG initiatives perhaps. But at the end of the day, making sure you're keeping those priorities clear, and we're staying aligned to that business plan. And next here, let me see here. We're looking at engage your enablers with the process. I've got a little bit of an issue with the slide, but let me look at a hard copy here. So first of all, why do I use the term enablers? I use the term enablers because if you don't have enablers in the business, your business isn't going to change. It won't change without them. Going back to the example I mentioned earlier, the potential client I had where nobody called the software company to see why they were in such a pickle. The same owner called me a year later, and he said, "I've made changes in senior management and middle management, and I think I'm ready for this." He said that my current vendor brought me some time, and unfortunately, I need to scale beyond them, and so we do need to do a system change. But he really clearly understood why, and I think he tried to get some enablers on his team. And so you want to identify the enablers in your organization that can drive and champion the changes that you need. if you're going into a new system. You need to keep business goals as the only goals and communicate them often. You've got to constantly reiterate why you're doing what you're doing. You got to be clear on the priority, budget, and expected results. And you also want to engage your stakeholders. And you want to do it with them and not to them. You want to establish your committees and build a plan for the selection and the implementation project, and consensus build the entire time. This sounds easy, but I have seen, particularly in regulated businesses, it takes years to get there. Particularly my regulated communication providers, my incumbents, they struggle with this because for years they were the only game in town and they could run like a DMV, and now they've got to compete, and it introduces a lot of challenges. So I'll pass it to Chad for our next polling question.
All right, thank you, Chuck. And our third polling question, what systems are you considering? Either A, human resource information system, B, field service management, C, customer relation management, D, construction operations, or E, other. You select the answer on your screen and hit the submit button. Your polling question will be recorded. We'll give you about 10 seconds here to answer this one.
And I think on this one, it's important to note basically what other systems are in consideration. We know ERP is kind of a catch-all, and this question is meant to understand what other needs are out there for you.
All right, let's check out the results.
Great. So I see about 20% or so are considering a new HRIS. About 10% is CRM. 5% is construction. Then we have a big old other, 63%. So I'll just ask you all to just kind of put in the chat in terms of what are the other systems that you're considering that potentially aren't on this list. Could be a financial management system, could be fixed asset management and maintenance. It could be, I'll say, manufacturing execution system or solution there, inventory management, could be accounts payable automation. Send us over, I'll say, a chat. Yeah, and I see it, coming through. So I appreciate full accounting, ERP, financial, transactional systems, great. Inventory management, awesome. Yep, full ERP, which includes all the above. Yep, absolutely. So a lot of, I'll say, financial management and ERP solutions in that other, it looks like. So terrific. So hopefully in the next couple of slides here, we'll try and tailor some of this to some of your responses, to make sure it's a little bit more engaging for you. So one of the first things you want to do in going through this process is you want to be able to identify priority-driven requirements. And so what does that really mean? It means you want to identify those requirements through a targeted process and needs analysis with driven business priorities. They're driven by business priorities. And so you want to engage with, as Chuck said, your enablers and having pointed discussions with those stakeholders in the organization across your different in-scope processes. I know that probably seems pretty obvious, but you'd be surprised how many times some of these people get in the room together and actually talk about their upstream and downstream, I'll say, implications of what they do on a day-to-day basis and what they find or see in their current system that's, I'll say, not helpful or is lacking in terms of capabilities. So this means getting the folks that are in procurement together with accounts payable in the same room, talking about what their needs are for a new system. And so I saw a lot of financial management answers there. So that would be a great one. That means including the folks that maybe do expense management, right? And expenses can span multiple industries. So construction is one where we have, I'll say maybe folks that are out in the field incurring expenses when they go to Home Depot. That means making sure that those expenses are captured in a meaningful way and enabling your accounts payable folks to either bill those expenses back, or sorry, account for those expenses by paying for them, and potentially marking those expenses as billable back to a client. So making sure that those align with your accounts receivable processes or accounts receivable folks. So it's making sure that your sales and operations team members are aligned as well, and gathering their feedback. What are they seeing if you're in a business where you're providing estimates or quotes or any of these things? What are they seeing up front, or what tools and resources do they need up front in order to best, I'll say, analyze or cost out what this work is going to entail, and how does that best line up with operations and what they're seeing for planning and what actually occurs when they go to deliver, right? And then it's making sure though, everything is aligned with your financial team, right? Not just AP, AR, but financial closing, reporting, any of those other areas. And so what else do we need to know? Well, we need to understand, how is your organization going to change or grow in the future? So are you one company, and are you going to go and become maybe multi-company? Is that going to be growth through acquisition? Are you looking to grow through new customer segments or new products or service offerings, new markets? Are you operating in maybe one state or multiple states? Are you operating in one country, or going to be operating in multiple countries? Is your workforce in the office, or are they remote? Will that change? Those are some of those, I'll say, considerations of how businesses have, I'll say, even more recently changed or grown significantly, and just the last few years. And so you need systems to be able to support that. And all of that has an implication over what solution you may be considering or should be considering. What else? Establishing meaningful metrics that will measure success. So what's important to you? What's important to your business? It could be that your month-end closing process takes too long. You want to be able to reduce that. It could be that you want to reduce your paper-based processes. It could be that reports are taking a dreadful time in terms of gathering those, and then reporting on them. And then by the time it's reported, it's outdated information. So you need more real-time reporting, and that's how you would measure success. Maybe, as Chuck mentioned before, you need more clarity and visibility over workflows and approvals. And you're getting lots of emails back and forth, and it's a very manual or time-consuming process. But these are some of the ideas behind, establishing what those metrics are for what success is going to look like in the future. And then, of course, you want to be able to gather information from additional resources. So that could be analysts, peers, references. It could be that G2 or Gartner are potential good starting points for kind of taking a look at what does the marketplace say is a good solution for our industry or for our type of business. But I'll say, kind of nothing beats customer references or a peer that's using this system, and in order to get a good understanding of their experience. It drastically helps reduce your risk, helps manage your expectations, making them more realistic on what a solution can provide for you and your organization. And that kind of goes hand in hand with, not getting that provider spin. So when you go out and you start talking to providers and software providers, they're going to be able to sell the product really, really well to you. And you don't want to do that. You don't want to be sold a software system. You need to be able to buy what you need, not what they sell you. And so you want to be able to acquire a new system, and you don't want to, I'll say, spend money obviously on things that you're not going to use. There's a lot of IT or technology debt in the marketplace today, meaning people buy software, they barely use any of it, but they're constantly paying this over and over again. And if that sounds familiar, you're not alone in that. But on this last point, you also want to be sure that you're conscientious of what you and your organization can reasonably take on. So that may mean, downstream, instead of one big bang, you're taking things in phases. Phase 1 versus phase 2 implementation, etc. And then you want to be able to engage providers, on your terms. And so what does that mean? It means using experts and industry-aligned resources to identify the potential solutions based on those requirements that you're gathering. So this is a pretty critical first step, because you want people that are, familiar with solutions in your industry that your business could use. And that helps you eliminate a lot of, I'll say, potential providers that just don't fit your business needs, kind of right away. I was in a conversation just last week with one of our clients, and they're going through this. They're going through this process, and they asked the question like, "Hey, what other systems should we be looking at, or should we be considering?" And on their short list, based upon what industry they're in, what business they're doing, and where they want to grow in terms of growth and everything else that we've uncovered, I said, hey, you should really be considering these other two solutions, and you should potentially eliminate, I'll say, 2 out of the 4 that that are even in consideration, because they're just not going to fit you at all. You're going to end up wasting your time because they just don't have either the capabilities or, I'll say, the ability to scale with what you want to do in terms of your growth and your expectations. As part of that, I said, hey, you want to be able to follow an RFP or RFI process that works for you. And by having a structured RFP and RFI process, it provides you all a standard for how providers are going to engage with you. It allows you, to get them into your buying process instead of you being in their selling process. And each one of these providers has kind of a different approach to selling. So you want to be able to standardize that. When you have a structured approach, when you set the expectations in the RFP or the RFI, request for information, on how to respond, on what activities are going to take place and when, it makes it a lot easier for you and your organization to evaluate providers on kind of this equal plane. And so when those providers are shortlisted, you want to follow a formal demonstration process that's tailored to you, that's based on your requirements that you gathered up front. And so what does that mean? It means being able to do that diligence up front helps downstream in the process. You gather those requirements for a reason, and the demonstration is not meant to be a generic demo of the software product. It's meant to show you how this system can meet your business needs. And that means providing those software vendors with day-in-the-life scenarios or example data that will ensure the solution you're considering can meet your expectations across these various functional areas of your business, across sales, across operations, across finance, across procurement. All of these different areas need to be, I'll say, incorporated into a demonstration, which tends to make demos, I'll say, pretty lengthy. And because those are lengthy, you want to be sure that your stakeholders or your enablers are getting buy-in as part of that process. You want to be sure that your people are engaged in those demonstrations, and this helps, I'll say, significantly in terms of, I'll say, your organizational transformation, organizational change, because you're eliciting feedback from your team members on what they perceive is not only what they saw, but also how they perceive the software vendor themselves, and the potential partner that will be helping for implementation. So a partner is just as critical as the software. You're going to be entering into potentially a long-term relationship, and you want that partner to not only know and understand you, and know and understand your business, but also all the other things that we discussed. So that way they can provide you with, I'll say, an aligned solution to your business needs. And then, lastly, I think I mentioned this before, but references that are relevant to your business. I think I mentioned that earlier. You want to be sure that you're getting good references from the software provider as well as your implementation partner. That means the reference will be in the same or similar industry. It means a similar size to your organization, have a similar scope in terms of module configuration, in terms of user count, as well as have comparable implementation timeline. And then it's not just about the on-paper analysis, right? This slide just kind of represents, I'll say, it says at the top here, initial rating versus RFP functional requirement score. You're going to have an on-paper analysis of how these providers stack up in comparison to each other. So before you even shortlist them, you want to be able to establish certain criteria here to evaluate them in maybe a little bit more subjective manner. How big is their organization? Where are they located? When were they founded? Is it cloud or is it on-prem? Do they have an open API integration? What partnerships do they already have I'll say, in the software ecosystem? Are they Oracle? Are they Microsoft? Are they Amazon? Which solution providers are they already currently working with to help you understand what is the longevity of their solution? And then here we have, I'll say, a really quick example of an analysis of the providers. Once they respond to your requirements, once they respond to the RFP, you'll be able to take those responses and evaluate them on what we have here, which is a radar graph. Now, ideally, they create, the ideal scenario here is that you want a more circular response rate, meaning that they have higher responses or a higher fit in each of these different functional areas. So you have general functionality. I know that might be a little bit difficult to read, but across around the circle's edges, you have the various functional requirements areas. General functionality is at the top. Business analytics. Is their CRM integrated? Do they have a native CRM? What about customer onboarding, billing? This is an example of, I'll say, one from a telecommunications client, because I can see there's customer onboarding, billing, and AR ticketing, and field service management. And you can see based upon the different areas where certain providers are strong and certain providers are weak. And you want to be able to do this this type of analysis is generally pretty easy once you have all the information. And provides you and I'll say other key team members with decision support on which solution you may want to move forward with and which solutions may not necessarily fit your needs. And with that, I'll pass it back over to you, Chuck.
Thank you, Kevin. Next thing you want to talk about here is kind of as you get into the later stages of a selection and you're evaluating perhaps your top two contenders, what does the approach to negotiation look like? What are some pointers there? And I think that one of the key things to remember is that the negotiation starts with the first interaction with these providers. And I think that this kind of dovetails on a structured RFP process and communicating how exactly it is that you're going to do your evaluation with the providers in your RFP so that they understand the schedule. And again, they understand your buying process. And the idea behind getting the providers into your buying process, again, to reiterate what Kevin mentioned earlier, one, it's so you can compare apples to apples, so that you can look at the responses to RFPs and, compare point to point where the vendors are. Again, that requires a lot of introspection in getting those requirements, but that's something that's got to be done. As you get down to the end, you want to ensure the implementation scope and plan is a fit, and not just the system itself, not a default configuration and things of that nature. And you want to be real about that scope. Now, real quick to back up a slide, this is a great tool, the radar graph. And the reason that I say it's a great tool, if I look at the provider here that appears to be the strongest, and for the sake of argument, I'm going to call it provider number one. The most important thing I think that you need to be aware of is, not where that provider is strong, like in the area of business analytics and CRM. Once I've narrowed them down to a strong contender, I want to understand what's in the divots of the circle. What's under the CRM area that they're not doing? What's in the customer portal that they're not doing? And making certain that I understand where those deficits are. And getting back to the scope, you want to make certain you understand the risk areas in the new system you're considering, and that your implementation plan and your SAL from the provider incorporate the mitigation of those risks. Where do I potentially have to do a customization? Where do I potentially have to pull in a third party? And making certain that the documents that govern the implementation and establish the scope take that into consideration. And so I always tell people, I never worry about the 85% that the vendor can do. I'm worried about the 15% they can't. Let's dial in there. And when I say that it needs to be incorporated into your engagement or your implementation planning, you need to consider all of those points in testing and really hit those hard. Understanding the total cost of ownership, not just subscription and implementation. What else is involved? Are there any soft costs with the implementation? Do you need to augment your staff at all while you're getting through this? One of the things I think that mid-market companies have a challenge with is, when you're at a very large company, you've got a huge shared services department that you can tap, and you can potentially get resources from those shared services departments. In the mid-market, depending on where you sit, you don't necessarily have those additional hands for these, capital projects. And so that's going to be a challenge. Hold off on naming a provider of choice for as long as possible. Target a sales reporting date like quarter end. I think providers tend to be a little more sharp with their pencils. And understand that terms can be leveraged, not just the initial price. How long am I locked into the price? That sort of thing. And most importantly, don't drive to the lowest price. Structure a plan that's going to be effective and get the solution implemented for a reasonable investment. And so real quick, how can Moss Adams add value to the process? The methodology I'm going to review very briefly here is a recap of everything we've talked about. Under the project initiation, you're going to do the engagement we talked about here, where we're dealing with the project charter. Why are we here? Confirming the scope, engaging your enablers, and dealing with some upfront walkthroughs and figuring out what needs to be done as far as getting the project underway. Internal diligence, reviewing your strategic objectives, getting to your prioritized requirements, understanding your current system gaps that you don't want to have repeated, come up with day in the life scenarios, which you're going to use later on in demos, and then come up with a provider shortlist. You're going to get into the provider evaluation, where you're going to issue the RFP. This is our fancy name for RFP process, but this is where you're going to do your provider management, getting them engaged, letting them know what's coming, review proposals that come in, get your provider profiles, update those RFP responses and get the data in, and look at your cost analysis. Get as much data points as you can at that point in the process. And then provider engagement, this is when you've got it down to a short list. Scripted demonstrations based on your day in the life scenarios, reference checks, the contract negotiations we just talked about, your final selection, and throughout the process, analyzing your risk. Where is the new system introducing things that change that the organization has to absorb, or risk areas the provider's got to address? And so what I would say on this process is this is the roadmap to getting it done correctly. Whether or not you use Moss, follow. And having said that, we'll go ahead and close out. I appreciate you guys spending part of your day with us. We're going to email a more detailed overview of the framework that I just reviewed, in addition to whatever Chad's going to cover here in a second. But again, I appreciate your time. I appreciate your input, and I'm going to pass it back to Chad. Thank you all very much.
All right. Thank you, Chuck and Kevin, for a great presentation today. If we didn't have time to answer your questions, we will do our best to follow up with you after the webcast. Here's a link to an online survey where you can provide feedback for today's presentation. Please take a moment to complete this survey, as your feedback is very important to us. Thank you for joining us today, and we hope you'll join us again next time.